Has the poor old hag kicked the bucket yet? I glared at the man, anger stirred within me by his words. This was my ex-husband, who had abandoned his blind mother to elope with his mistress. It was hard to believe he was the son of my kind mother-in-law, his words pushing my anger to boiling point. You must have had a hard time too, huh? Now you're free. Do whatever you want. Though there's a limit to what an old bag like you can do, I guess. His raucous and vulgar laughter rang out. Hiding my anger, I flashed a smile back at my ex-husband. Yeah, I've just inherited $3 million. So, I'm gonna enjoy my freedom from now on. The smirk vanished from the face of my ex-husband, who had just been belittling me. He probably couldn't even imagine that he would soon be begging me for forgiveness. My name is Grace. I'm 63 now. I got married young and moved in with my in-laws. While blessed with kind in-laws, my husband was a severe disappointment. I divorced him 10 years ago. At the time, I was 53. Our daughter, Mary, was 18. And our son, Jack, was 15. It was the most expensive time for their education. On top of that, my mother-in-law was blind. Between supporting my children's education and taking care of my mother-in-law, life was anything but easy. My ex-husband, John Young, and I met at the company where we worked. When I joined the company at 18, John was 24 and had been working there for 2 years after graduating from college. He was a senior and seemed reliable, which made me look up to him. John was popular and good at taking care of others, often helping me, who was still inexperienced. Despite being a catch, for some reason, he took a liking to me and asked me out. After we decided to get married, I met his parents for the first time. His father had mobility issues, and his mother was blind. Knowing that John was supporting his parents while working, I was deeply moved. However, my parents opposed our marriage. They were worried that I would have a hard time as caregiving was clearly in my future. But I was young, and I admired his wonderful parents, so I ignored my parents' concerns and got married. My parents, upset that I had married on my own terms, said they would cut ties with me. But I already had a new family. Youth is scary. I wasn't afraid of anything. After getting married, I quit my job. I took on the responsibilities of caring for my in-laws and managing household chores so my husband could focus on his work. My in-laws were deeply appreciative of me and treated me as their own daughter. They never forgot to express their gratitude and show consideration towards me. Although caregiving was difficult, spending so much time with them made it less of a burden. My husband worked late every day. I was under the impression that our household was running smoothly. One day, I ran into a former coworker of my husband's at the grocery store. Naturally, we started talking about my husband and me. The coworker said, "Your husband, Mr. Young, always leaves work early because he's worried about you, Grace. He's such a wonderful husband." I couldn't believe my ears. My husband always came home after 10 p.m. He was never home early. There must have been a mistake. That's what I thought, but I couldn't say anything at the time. All I could do was give an awkward smile and agree, yes, that's true. When I got home, I brought it up with my husband. I had planned to subtly hint at the subject. "You've been coming home late recently. Can't you come home a little earlier? I feel bad for your father. It seems a little embarrassing for him to be cared for by a woman. Can't you at least help him bathe?" But before I could finish my sentence, my husband yelled at me. "What? I'm working, you know? I'm not just messing around. Tell my dad not to be so demanding." "But your father isn't demanding anything. I just felt that way." My husband seemed to have no intention of helping with the caregiving. Moreover, I felt he was being too defensive. My bad hunch was probably right. But I couldn't admit it at that time. I was scared of what would happen to me if I confronted him and discovered something I didn't want to know. I had gotten married against my parents' wishes, so I didn't have a home to go back to. I was worried about my in-laws too. In the end, I chose to live each day as usual. One day, I thought of buying an electric wheelchair for my father-in-law. Right now, he gets by with a cane and a manual wheelchair. But with an electric wheelchair, he could even go for a short stroll. If I put my blind mother-in-law in the wheelchair and push her, we could go for walks further afield. I discussed this with my husband. I never doubted that he would agree. But his response was lukewarm. "Huh? Do we need it?" My husband made a grimace at my suggestion. "I'm barely making ends meet with my income. Do we really need to spend money on that?" We were not well off, that's true. But if the wheelchair could bring even a little happiness to my in-laws, I wouldn't consider it a waste of money. So, could we perhaps borrow a bit from the bank and repay it later with my in-laws' pension? I mused. John seemingly partially agreed, warning, just don't put me in trouble. I couldn't relay his words verbatim to my in-laws. Yet, when I conveyed the message positively, indicating we could borrow from the bank, my father-in-law was elated. Together, we visited the bank, set up a loan, and purchased an electric wheelchair. My in-laws were utterly thrilled. However, not long after, my father-in-law passed away. I, along with my mother-in-law, were deeply saddened, but John grumbled, he's just left us with the debt. That's why I said we didn't need to buy it. I was sure my mother-in-law overheard it. And I was filled with guilt. Now it was just me and my mother-in-law living together at home. My mother-in-law was blind, but there were things she could manage by herself at home. My caregiving duties were significantly reduced. Around that time, John suggested we should start thinking about having children. I was doubtful about John at first, but if he's saying that, maybe there was some misunderstanding before. Eventually, we had 2 children. Unfortunately, John didn't change even after the kids were born. He barely paid attention to the household matters. My days were filled with the endless cycle of chores and childcare. Despite it all, my mother-in-law's happiness was my saving grace. She couldn't see the grandchildren with her eyes, but the lively sounds of children had added more smiles to her face since the loss of her husband. We continued to live a happy life from then on. But as my colleague once told me, John was always late coming home from work. The words at my father-in-law's funeral were unforgettable. There was no sense of affection for my mother-in-law or the children, and recently even on his days off, he would go to work, with all the love drained from his face. As long as he was providing financially, it was fine. That was the thought I had started to harbor. Our marriage was failing, but our children grew up to be kind and honest. Change came to our family when our daughter turned 18 and was about to start college. I'm off to work, John said one Saturday, a supposed day off. I had to stop him. You promised to take my mother-in-law to the hospital today. It was a promise we had made a few days before. Today was the day for my mother-in-law's medical checkup. It was also the day when my daughter was moving into her dorm as she began college. Knowing these plans in advance, I had asked my husband to take my mother-in-law to the hospital. What? Isn't that your job as a housewife? He yelled at me. Didn't I tell you that today is Mary's move-in day? I need to help her set up her new life and get everything ready before college starts. Apparently, my fiery response agitated my husband. I had never talked back or made such a fuss before. It seemed my outburst surprised him and he was quite upset. I didn't hear about any of that. I married you because I thought you were not popular and would take care of my parents. Now you want me to take care of my mom? If you can't do it, let her go alone. I was dumbstruck by his words. What a terrible person he was. I had noticed that he was avoiding my mother-in-law. But it's too much to ask a blind woman to go out alone. What's more, his insulting words towards me were unbearable. Knowing the reason why my once popular husband married me, I was filled with regret. That's enough. That's all I said to my husband. I had given up expecting anything from him. Seeing that I did not retort, he seemed satisfied and said, "Then, take good care of the old lady and the kids." After saying that, he never returned home again. In the end, I had my eldest daughter take care of her dorm move-in and purchase the necessities for her new life. Meanwhile, I accompanied my mother-in-law to her health checkup, and somehow we made it through the day. Everyone noticed that he didn't return, but nobody said anything. A few days later, a letter arrived at our house. It was from my husband. There was no address, just his name. The letter contained a divorce notice and a simple message that he was going to live with his lover. It also stated that he wanted nothing to do with the debt left by the old folks, and we could live our lives as we please. I was exhausted. I felt that I would be happier severing ties with him. Before filing the divorce papers, I informed my children and my mother-in-law about the situation. My mother-in-law was the most shocked. "I'm sorry." She held my hand and kept repeating that phrase while crying. "I've been made happy by you, Grace, and my grandkids, Mary and Jack. But if you're getting divorced, then I'm a stranger. I'll live on my own. It'll take time, but I will move out." That's what my mother-in-law muttered. I replied strongly to her words. "You are no different from my real mother, and you are the only grandmother for my children. We don't need to worry about anything for our future life. We are still a family even after the divorce." Let's live together as we have been." Upon hearing my words, my mother-in-law thanked me while sobbing. However, I was not without worries. Even my husband was better than nothing when it came to the financial aspects. Now, he was gone. I desperately searched for a job, but no one would hire me as I had been a housewife for many years. Both Mary and Jack offered to work. When I thought it was inevitable, my mother-in-law spoke up. "Go to college or high school without worrying. Grace, you can continue as you are without working. Leave it to me." We were perplexed by her words. However, just as my mother-in-law said, our lives continued without any change. If anything, I felt we were allowed to live more lavishly than when my husband was with us. I filed for divorce through my lawyer. My mother-in-law wanted to report him missing, but I had no desire to see that man again. But surely, she must want to see her son, my ex-husband. But even after she reported him missing, my ex-husband was never found. Our family of 4 created many memories, and about 2 years ago, my mother-in-law left to join my father-in-law. In the end, she never got to reunite with my ex-husband during her lifetime. Technically, my ex-husband is her son. I can't just not contact him. But even when I looked up his address, there was no one living there. Reluctantly, we held a small funeral, sending off my mother-in-law with just the 3 of us. And now, standing before me is my ex-husband. He appeared in front of me by chance when I was out shopping alone. I thought I had mistaken him for someone else and decided to ignore him, but he kept his eyes on me. It's probably not a mistake. He must have thought the same because he started talking to me, showing off a much younger-looking woman beside him. "Grace, right? You're as glum as ever. How rude to say something like that." The woman next to him also laughed softly. Seeing them mocking me made me sigh. And just when I was about to walk past them, "Did the poor old hag already kick the bucket?" I stopped in my tracks at his words and glared at my ex-husband. "Poor old hag? Who are you talking about?" As I asked him that, he smirked and answered, "You know who I'm talking about, don't ya? The blind old hag we lived with. Heard it through the grapevine. Must have been tough for you, huh? But you're free now. Do what you want? Well, there's only so much freedom an old hag like you can handle." This crude laughter bellowed from my ex-husband. The anger inside me was reaching its boiling point. But if I show anger here, I'll be playing right into his hands. I suppressed my rage and smiled back at him. "Yeah, I received an inheritance of about $3 million. So, I don't have to work anymore. I'm living life freely. Thanks for your concern." "What?" The smirk on the face of my ex-husband, who had been belittling me just moments ago, vanished. "See ya." My ex-husband stood dumbfounded. As I was about to walk away, he hurriedly called out to me. Wait a minute. An inheritance of $3 million? What are you talking about?" "What am I talking about? I mean exactly what I said. Thanks for disappearing. Because of that, I was able to inherit smoothly without you in the picture." Upon hearing my words, my ex-husband turned pale. I thought it served him right. I had no intention of telling him anything, but I guess he should know. He should know how foolish he is. "You're kidding me. I'm her son, right? I didn't hear about any inheritance. I should have a right to get a share, too." Upon hearing his words, I couldn't help but smirk. "Well, yes, but you were gone. Did you know that after 7 years of disappearance, you are considered legally dead?" "What?" "So, your mother-in-law's inheritance was willed to me, your eldest son and eldest daughter. You have no role in this anymore." My ex-husband looked dumbfounded. I almost burst out laughing. I understood why my mother-in-law told me to file a missing persons report after she had passed. The large amount of inheritance she had left behind. A man claiming to be a lawyer appeared and explained everything to me. My mother-in-law's family was a landowner. However, she, like me, had severed ties with her family. Nevertheless, she had the right to inherit. When her parents passed away, she inherited without telling anyone. Thanks to this, we were able to live without any worries. I once asked my mother-in-law, "Mrs. Young, how are you managing your money? If it's a pension or something like that, please use it however you like." My mother-in-law responded, "I'm using it as I please. To live a happy life with my family." I knew it wasn't a pension by the way she spent money. However, it was definitely her money. Although we were in need, we decided to gratefully accept her offer. The inheritance she received was far more than she could ever use in her lifetime. The problem was the existence of my husband. If things remained the same, If something were to happen to her, my husband would inherit everything. But she did not want to hand it over to her son. During her consultation with a lawyer, my husband disappeared. She thought he had finally cut ties with us. She was sad to part from us, but she thought she would just move into a nursing home with assisted living and use up almost all of her inheritance so that she would not leave any troubles behind. However, my eldest son, eldest daughter, and I all told her that we saw her as a family member and wanted to continue living as we had been. There was no happier moment for my mother-in-law than this. Wanting to pass on her inheritance to us, she followed her attorney's advice and filed a missing person report for my husband. Following the law, my husband left home, and after 7 years, legally he was treated as if he had passed away. 1 year later, when my mother-in-law passed away, her inheritance was passed on through lineage to her oldest son and daughter, in place of my husband. I had no rights to inheritance, but my mother-in-law left a will to include me as well. Thus, we were able to receive her loving legacy. Because you left, all of Jack's and Mary's tuition and living expenses were covered by your mom. We were able to live happily because of that. Thank you for leaving. Upon hearing my words, my ex-husband was left with his mouth agape in shock. Serves him right. My ex-husband then contacted me saying that he should have a share in the inheritance. After all these years of silence, I can't believe how awful he is. There's no inheritance for someone who's legally dead. I've said this to him many times, but he's not convinced and insists on discussing it further. I consulted an attorney. For my ex-husband to inherit anything, there would have to be various procedures, such as retracting the missing person report. In cases like these, it is often the grandchildren who inherit the estate. We had no intention of giving my ex-husband a single penny. I told my ex-husband exactly what the attorney told me. If he wanted to inherit, he would also have to pay inheritance tax. When I told him to handle all these procedures, he fell silent. Our children were also present, and we had a discussion. I can't take off work. I can't handle these procedures. Besides, I don't need to pay inheritance tax. You guys should just pay my share. I've taken care of you guys. You should at least do this much for me. I was disgusted by my defiant ex-husband. Apparently, he's working a day-to-day job now, and he can't afford to take a day off. The company he was working at when we were married had fired him due to his chronic absences. When I asked why he left his job and why he was in such financial trouble, it turns out he had a debt to a previous lover. He had been working day-to-day jobs and moving around a lot to pay it back. Understand me. Even when he said this, I couldn't understand him at all. So, it didn't work out with that woman, right? Then who was that woman you were with the other day? When I asked this, my ex-husband arrogantly said, "She's the one I've been looking for." My oldest son was trying hard not to laugh. "Are you married to that woman?" I asked. "No, we've only been together for half a year," my ex-husband muttered in a small voice. Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. My oldest son, me, and my oldest daughter were speechless with astonishment, sighing at the stupidity of the man in front of us. "What about the woman you left with when we divorced? She said she couldn't make me happy and left." He said this nonchalantly, but does he realize that he was dumped? I guess he's been living his life changing women one after the other like that. "You're an old man, stop acting like you're still young," I advised my pitiful ex-husband. "She's my destined woman." When he said this, I realized that anything I said to him would be pointless. Thanks to the reunion with my ex-husband, I found out where he lives. Apparently, he's living in an apartment in the next town over, which is under his girlfriend's name. My oldest son bought the entire building and became the landlord. "It's the money Grandma gave us. It would be a waste to just leave it there. I thought it would be better to have real estate." My oldest son said this. I thought he wanted to help his father, but that was not the case. On the contrary, if the rent is even a day late, he goes to demand it. The previous landlord was patient, but my son is not like that. "You've put your mother through enough trouble. You selfishly chose this life, so you should suffer even more than she did." It must have been my eldest son's own way of punishing his father. My ex-husband, who had never been much of a father figure. The kids must have had their own thoughts about it. Maybe that's why he couldn't bear this life anymore. My ex-husband came to our home, begging for forgiveness. "I'm really sorry. I pushed my responsibilities as a parent and a spouse onto you, Grace. I was in the wrong." I couldn't help but sigh at the sight. My ex-husband was desperate. "But I also have a life to live. Can't you get Jack to cut me some slack on the rent? He must be really struggling to have to ask this with teary eyes. I don't know. If you had been a decent father to the kids, you wouldn't be in this situation. A failed son, a failed husband, a failed father, what's left in your life now? What was your life all about? You really need to think about that. My words left my ex-husband silent, and he left without a word. His figure looked so small as he walked away. In the end, my ex-husband was kicked out of his apartment due to rent arrears. His new place seems to be an apartment with a 50-year-old building where drafts come in. He seems to be still living day by day, taking on whatever jobs he can find. On the day we reunited, he apparently broke up with the woman he was with when he moved out of the apartment. It seems he had been supporting her living expenses. Since he was essentially evicted for failing to pay rent, I guess it couldn't be helped. Rather, I think he should be thankful that his mistress stayed with him for as long as she did. She was still young and, like me back then, probably hadn't seen through the man my ex-husband is. We are living happily now, thanks to my mother-in-law. As my eldest son said, we invested in real estate and stocks, so we can earn passive income, and we have plenty of time for leisure, like traveling every month. And my eldest daughter, Mary, is getting married. Her fiancé is very kind and treats her well. Our family and happiness are going to increase. I'm relishing the happiness of today, which is possible because we overcame our difficult past.